I never wanted to believe the legends of the colossal men, the true builders of the old world. It was too convenient, too fantastical, a narrative built for the fringe. But then, you find the dust on the leather ledger, the one marked Property of the American Anthropological Institute, 1852 Expeditionary Clearance. They call it the 1850 Bone Survey, but it was not a survey. It was an eradication, a systematic surgical cleansing of the archaeological record, designed specifically to establish the historical ceiling of human achievement. They needed us to believe we were the pinnacle, not the diminished inheritors squatting in the ruins of giants. Look closely at the faded photographic plate from the Ohio Valley Dig circa 1851. The official caption identifies the structure as a Native American burial mound, attributing the precision-cut, cyclopean stone to primitive tools and overwhelming coordinated labor. But one photo destroys it. Just one. It shows the excavation team clustered around a deep trench, and there, resting on a tarp beside the measuring rod, is a femur. It is not merely large, it is structurally impossible for a modern 7-foot man. It is the length of a parlor door, the width of a small child. This was not a tall person. This was another species entirely. The Institute, the architects of the official narrative, had a profound existential problem. If the structures we now call Tartarian, those monolithic, impossible buildings of fused copper and iron, were demonstrably built by beings fundamentally different from us, the entire timeline collapses. The lie they sold us about steam power and primitive engineering constructing the New York Public Library or the Chicago World's Fair vanishes in a puff of smoke. They needed to compress history to make the impossible fit the manageable, and that meant incinerating the builders. The 1850 Bone Survey was initiated and run through a clandestine network of newly formed state institutions, often disguised as geological or agricultural commissions. Their mandate was chillingly simple: recover any skeletal remains exceeding the established parameters of Homo sapiens, catalog them, and ensure their immediate permanent removal from the public eye. They didn't just find isolated anomalies. They found cemeteries, entire necropolises of these massive figures often discovered in disconcerting proximity to the deepest layers of the Mudflood deposits. Why the sudden urgency in the 1850s? Because the Mudflood, that catastrophic global reset that buried the ground floors of every major city, had exposed them. The cleansing event, whether natural or weaponized, had ripped away the topsoil and the fabricated history layer, revealing the foundations of the old world and the remains of its occupants. The inheritors, our ancestors, were literally digging out their basements and finding evidence that invalidated everything the new global governance was trying to implement. They were finding the proof that we were not the first. I tracked the inventory tags through 3 separate, heavily secured archives: New York, London, and the suppressed records of the Smithsonian before the Great Fire. The patterns are chillingly consistent. Tags listing hominid type 3 or incongruous cranial structure all lead to the same final disposition: incinerated, 1868, pursuant to the National Antiquities Act. They didn't study them, they burned them. The giant's femur from that Ohio dig, the one photographed next to the measuring rod, it was labeled Exhibit Z99 and was recorded as destroyed in the subsequent 1865 Smithsonian fire. A convenient, all-consuming blaze that managed somehow to spare the delicate paper records of Lincoln's correspondence, but completely vaporized the iron-dense, irreplaceable bones of the old world builders. This was not merely suppression, it was a ritualistic sacrifice of truth. The parasites who seized control after the Great Reset understood that the physical presence of the giants, the tangible proof of superior, pre-cataclysmic humanity, would forever undermine their fragile authority. If the previous civilization was so advanced they utilized free, ethereal energy and built architecture that defies our modern, debt-ridden engineering, then the current rulers are exposed for what they are: usurpers, squatting in borrowed time. We are dwarves in the halls of forgotten kings, and the Institute ensured that every piece of evidence confirming our diminished stature was reduced to ash and scattered to the winds. They silenced the dead so they could control the living. This foundational operation had to succeed. It did. They replaced history with a ghost story. The ghost story they wrote is betrayed by the stage they set it on. Look around you, inheritors. You are squatting in borrowed spaces, occupying the ruins of a civilization that possessed a command over physics we now only pretend to understand. We analyze the construction of the so-called post-Civil War structures, the state houses, the customs buildings, the vast monumental libraries, and we see a profound, aching disparity between the claimed builders and the actual architecture. Who, in the ruined, impoverished 1860s, possessed the technology to quarry and lift monolithic granite blocks weighing 60 tons, stacking them with a precision that required no mortar? Who maintained a metallurgy capable of crafting iron that, 150 years later, shows barely a trace of oxidation? This is not crude, debt-ridden Victorian engineering. This is something else entirely. The precision is staggering. The scale is insulting. Why are the first-floor windows often half buried beneath the current street level? Why are the ceilings so impossibly high, demanding 20-foot doors and staircases designed for a gate far grander than our own? The official narrative calls this grandeur, or neoclassical style. I call it a hand-me-down from a race of beings whose stature demanded that verticality. We are living in the infrastructure of giants. We are wearing their shoes, tripping over their thresholds. Consider the ornamentation they dismiss as mere decoration. The copper roofs, the gold leaf on the domes, the spires culminating in complex crystalline structures. These are not aesthetic choices. They are components. They are the antennae and condensers of the old world's power grid, the etheric grid. This was the technology that harnessed atmospheric electricity, providing free, non-polluting, vital energy to entire civilizations. Every cupola, every finial was designed for harmonic resonance, drawing ambient power, distributing it through the building's metallic skeletal structure. They didn't need coal. They didn't need cables. They didn't need meters. They had natural cleansing power, pulled directly from the ether. The Institute couldn't monetize this, they couldn't control it, so they dismantled it, piece by piece, replacing the gold-tipped spires with pointless radio antennas, replacing the vital free energy with the choking carbon-based system we pay for today. This is the ultimate act of theft, disguised as modernization. They replaced the divine current with the electric bill. But the architecture, while damning, is circumstantial. The true existential danger to the parasites lay beneath the soil, the ossuaries, the physical remains. The 1850s were a period of intense infrastructural development, exactly when the Mudflood deposits were being excavated. Cities were being dug out, foundations were being laid, and what they found was undeniable. I have fragments of the 1856 Smithsonian survey logs, recovered from a safe deposited beneath the Library of Congress. Documents detailing the discovery of skeletal remains across the Ohio Valley and the Pacific Northwest. Not just tall men, but beings whose colossal femurs suggested heights ranging from 10 to 15 feet. The immense cranial capacity, the density and purity of the bone structure, it spoke of a different lineage, a different humanity, a superior form. One specific log, meticulously preserved, labeled Crate 44, the Allegheny find, describes a jawbone so large a normal man could wear it as a helmet. It contained dentition far more advanced than our own, with wisdom teeth that had never decayed. This was their nightmare. Proof that the current inhabitants were not the peak of evolution, but the degenerate, diminished inheritors of a superior lineage. The Institute moved swiftly and brutally. They leveraged their control over the nascent scientific institutions, the very bodies claiming to seek truth, to classify these finds as anomalous pre-Homeric fauna. The official report states that the entire collection, including Crate 44, the Allegheny jaw, and the massive Pacific Northwest pelvises, was tragically lost in the Great Smithsonian Fire of 1865. A convenient, purifying conflagration, destroying the evidence necessary to rewrite history cleanly. They didn't just burn the evidence, they burned the truth of who we once were. They incinerated the very memory of the giants so that we would remain small, compliant, and forever paying for the light they stole. The fire was not an accident. It was forensic incineration on a national scale, and we have been kneeling ever since. The tragedy of the giant bones, the tragic loss of the physical evidence, is intrinsically linked to the theft of the energetic infrastructure. The Institute needed us to forget the giants because the giants were the architects of a paradise we are now merely squatters within. Look around you. Study the cities built before 1900. These aren't just buildings. They are colossal, complex machines disguised as civic monuments. They are the remnants of Antiquitech, and the scale is the staggering proof that they were built by, or for, beings far surpassing our current stature and understanding. Why would a 19th century society, relying on horses and coal, construct structures with 7 subterranean levels and domes reaching heights that defy the practical application of steam power? The official narrative tells us this was for aesthetics or civic pride. I tell you it was for function. Every dome, every copper spire, every ornate railing was a component of a vast, global apparatus. These structures were not illuminated by primitive gas lamps. They were resonance chambers, tuned instruments designed to draw upon the limitless, free energy that saturated the atmosphere, the elusive ether. They were receivers, transmitting and transducing the ambient zero-point energy, distributing light, heat, and power wirelessly across the old world. This was the Tartarian grid, a system so efficient, so pure, that it rendered the concept of a monthly utility bill utterly laughable. The parasites who seized control understood that total dominance required total dependency. If the light is free, the mind is free. If the power is decentralized, control is impossible. This is why the Mudflood event, whatever its true nature, whether geological upheaval or engineered catastrophe, was so crucial to their plan. It didn't just bury the ground floors, it buried the vital components of the grid. It choked the subterranean mercury vapor systems, shorted the massive copper coils, and disconnected the foundational resonators that maintained the harmonic integrity of the entire system. And then came the great replacement. The brutal, inefficient, polluting substitution. They didn't just install wires, they installed servitude. They replaced the free, ambient, vital energy of the ether with the finite, toxic consumption of coal, oil, and gas. They forced us to pay for the friction they created. They forced us to pay for the wires that inefficiently carry the energy they must now constantly generate and ration. The anger I feel contemplating this theft is not intellectual. It is visceral. They stole paradise and replaced it with a cage of escalating cost and planned obsolescence. But the most profound function of the Antiquitech was not merely illumination. It was health. The harmonic resonance created by the etheric grid was inherently cleansing. It was a constant field of vibration that maintained the integrity of the cellular structure, preventing decay and promoting longevity. This is why the builders of the old world, the giants, were robust, long-lived, and possessed of minds capable of engineering such wonders. When they dismantled the grid, they didn't just turn off the lights. They turned off the wellspring of human vitality. They replaced free, resonant healing with paid poisonous dependency. They took the natural harmonic frequencies that kept the body whole and told us we needed synthesized chemicals, pharmacological poisons, to manage the symptoms of a world stripped of its energetic equilibrium. You see the intricate ironwork on the old bridges? The detailed filigree on the ventilation grates? We are told this is Victorian decoration. This is a lie. These are waveguides. These are tuning forks. They held the precise frequency necessary to maintain the atmospheric charge. When they were removed, or when they were coated in layers of lead paint and dirt, the city began to die. The people began to weaken. We have fragments of the original schematics, hidden in the archives of the Vatican and the deeper vaults of the Library of Congress, labeled innocuously as ornamental drafting studies. These documents, which I have seen only in heavily redacted microfiche, show detailed cross-sections of domes filled not with air, but with liquid mercury, acting as a superconducting plasma conduit. They show foundation stones drilled with complex crystalline matrices designed to interact with telluric currents. The few original documents that survived the cleansing 3 entire crates detailing the mercury vapor systems of the Chicago World's Fair, were quietly transported to a facility in Nevada in 1953 and incinerated under the guise of radioactive waste disposal. They destroyed the bones to make us small, they destroyed the grid to make us dependent, and they destroyed the knowledge to make us stupid enough to believe the official narrative that we built these colossal, superconducting cathedrals with nothing more than horse carts and ambition. We are living in the ruins of a golden age, paying for the dust and shadows they allow us to keep. We are the inheritors of ruins, constantly struggling to power the meager, wired devices that keep us distracted from the limitless power humming silently beneath our asphalt roads. The silence of the ether is the sound of our enslavement. The silence of the ether is the sound of our enslavement. But the Institute, the architects of the official narrative, understood that stealing the technology was only half the battle. They had to eradicate the memory of the builders. They had to erase the giants. If the inheritors were ever allowed to reconcile the scale of the old world's architecture, these colossal, superconducting structures, with the size of the people who supposedly built them, the entire chronology would collapse instantly. The 12-foot doorways, the staggering ceiling heights, the furniture built for hands 3 times our own. These are not aesthetic choices. They are measurements. They are physical evidence of a previous species of humanity, one whose very existence proves our current, diminished state is artificial. They began the systematic eradication around the same time they finalized the timeline of the supposed American Civil War, roughly 1850 to 1870. The period of instability was perfect for historical cleansing. This was the era of the great archaeological surveys, not to discover, but to catalog and neutralize. I have accessed the digitized remnants of what I call the 1850 Bone Survey, a transnational effort disguised as geological exploration and ethnographic study. The field notes, often written in frantic, barely legible script, speak of skeletal remains that defy the current biological model, skulls with double rows of teeth, femurs that measured 60 inches from head to condyle. The measurements are clinical, precise, and terrifyingly consistent, beings ranging from 9 feet 6 inches to over 12 feet in height. They were not mythical creatures. They were simply the previous inhabitants of this planet. They were the old world architects. The Institute recognized the existential threat these bones posed to their control structure. If modern humanity realized we were squatting in the homes of giants, paying rent for the ruins of a golden age built by beings far superior to us, the illusion of progress would shatter. The narrative of linear evolution, from caveman to Victorian gentleman, was paramount. They could not tolerate the idea of devolution, of a cosmic inheritance squandered. So they moved quickly. They called it reclassification. They labeled it hoax or misidentified megafauna. But the sheer volume of evidence was overwhelming. We are talking about thousands of documented finds across the Mississippi Valley, the Caucasus, and the Gobi Desert. The evidence had to be physically eliminated, and this, my friends, is where the fire comes in. The great fires of the mid to late 19th century, Chicago, Boston, London, and most importantly, the various fires that ravaged the Smithsonian collections. These were not accidents sparked by errant lanterns or dry lumber. They were purification rituals. Arson targeted against specific repositories of knowledge. The infamous Crate 44, containing the largest documented Atlantean skull recovered from Ohio, did not simply vanish. It was specifically relocated to the basement storage of the Smithsonian's West Wing, just weeks before the devastating 1865 fire. The official report states the contents were incinerated beyond recognition. Incinerated. A word that carries the cold weight of deliberate malice. The giant's femur, the one measured in Pennsylvania in 1853, was not burned. It was deemed too resilient. Instead, the logbooks confirm it was shipped from Philadelphia to a naval vessel under the guise of a geological specimen transfer. Weighted with lead ingots, that colossal bone, the undeniable proof of our true past, was dropped into the crushing black silence of the Challenger Deep. They ensured that even if we discovered the records, the physical object would be irrecoverable. They systematically destroyed the bodies and the books. They replaced the true history of giants with sanitized stories of dinosaurs and early hominids, distracting us with creatures safely separated by millions of years, rather than the uncomfortable truth that the old world ended barely 170 years ago. The parasites needed us small. They needed us ignorant. They needed us convinced that we were the pinnacle of evolution, even as we struggled to maintain the broken plumbing in the basements of buildings we couldn't design today. They stole our technology, and then they stole our lineage. We are not the inheritors of ruins. We are the descendants of a theft so brutal, it rewrote the very laws of physics and biology. And they are still watching the seabed, waiting for the water pressure to finish the job. The official narrative is not a history, it is a cage. It is a structure of intellectual servitude designed to convince us that our own limitations are natural rather than imposed. They replaced the free, vital resonance of the old world, that omnipresent atmospheric energy that powered the colossal structures and healed the body, with the toxic, controlled currency of coal, oil, and debt. The greatest theft was not of gold, but of frequency. When you understand the true size of the former inhabitants, you realize the structures we call architecture were in fact Antiquitech, machines built to harvest and distribute that etheric charge. The massive doorways, the staggering ceiling heights, the ornate, highly conductive materials, they were scaled for beings whose physiology demanded a harmonic environment we can no longer even perceive. We are squatters in the engine room of a civilization we cannot restart. And what of the physical proof? The Institute, the parasites, they understand the power of a single object that defies the timeline. I speak now of the tragic fate of the 1850 bone survey findings. The documents, the photographs, the measurements, they burned. Oh, not in a single convenient fire. That would be too obvious. No. The most damning relics were subjected to a calculated, slow incineration across multiple decades. Crate 44, containing the most intact skull fragments from the Ohio Valley, fragments that proved a cranial capacity far exceeding the modern Homo sapiens, was quietly recorded as lost to saltwater corrosion in the 1871 inventory, even though it had been securely stored inland in St. Louis. The colossal, petrified femur, the one that necessitated 3 men to lift it, the one that proved the 12-foot minimum height, it was deemed a biohazard anomaly by the Smithsonian in 1898 and subjected to a high-heat cleansing protocol. Incinerated. Gone. They did not just hide the evidence, they purified it. They cleansed the timeline of its truth, leaving behind only the sterile, manageable story of slow, linear evolution. They needed us to believe we were too small to build their ruins and too small to challenge their authority. This is the source of the melancholic ache, the saudade that haunts the collective unconscious. We are mourning a world we never knew, a lineage we cannot trace. We feel the phantom limb of the giant within us, the potential they ripped away. We look at the ruins of Tartaria, those magnificent mud-soaked monuments, and we see not just stones and mortar, but a promise broken. We are living in the silent era, the aftermath of a catastrophic historical reset. The gates of the old world slammed shut around 1850, sealing away the knowledge, the power, and the true scale of humanity. But the question that keeps me awake, here in the dark, surrounded by dust on leather journals, is this. If the erasure was so complete, if the effort to destroy the physical, biological proof was so brutal and relentless, are we certain that every single archive was purged? Are we certain that every giant, every remnant of the elder race was accounted for and disposed of? Or are they simply waiting? Waiting beneath the sediment of the Mudflood, waiting for the vibrational frequency of this broken planet to align once more, ready to shatter the false narrative and step back into the light? I wonder what they will think of us, the inheritors, when they finally wake up and find us squatting in their magnificent, broken silent machines.